Good morning, everyone. We'll start our class today, probably the final regular class for C programming. And hereafter, like on a need basis, if any of you need clarifications or special sessions, we'll have other classes. Okay, so we have very little things to discuss here, just one program. And after discussing that, we'll switch on to general topics, general discussions regarding assignment, lab, etc. Okay. So in the last classes, we were discussing about creation of files, writing data into files, reading data from files, etc. using C programs. And generally, what we studied is a certain function, set of functions. In fact, f open, f close. These functions, how to use them in our C program, so that we can create files, open files, write into files, read from files, etc. Okay, and we have seen sufficient examples for that. Almost every languages provide this kind of functions to deal with files, creating, opening, closing, reading, writing, deletion. Several, actually, much more functions are there. Okay, we are learning only a subset of the functions available in C. If you take any other language, so many functions are there. Okay, just to get a feel of that, we are learning a subset of all the functions available for managing files. So our final program is uh, like three files are involved. One is an input file, and second and third are two output files. We assume that, or we create the input file and write some numbers into this. Input file name is data, and that file also we are creating in the beginning. Initially we are creating that file, writing certain integers into that file. After that, we read back those integers and separate them as odd numbers and even numbers, and then write into different files. So first we create these files and write a set of integers, and then read those numbers and separate those integers. We divide among two other files and write into that. After writing into these two files, odd and even files, we will read back from those files also and display the contents of those files. Basically, we are dividing a set of integers into even and odd numbers and writing them into separate files, then reading them back and displaying the contents. So to begin with, we have three file pointers, f1, f2 and f3, three file pointers. Then we ask the user how many numbers are there. So this is the user input, and what we do is we open the input file, and we are going to initially store data into the input file. Okay, so that file name is data. Generally, whatever number we are getting from the user, we immediately write it into the file represented by f1. So we open the file and assign the address of the file to f1, pointer f1, and whatever numbers we are getting, immediately we are writing into that file in binary format. Put w writes the file data into the file in binary format, but put c and fprintf writes in text format, meaning we can open the file and see the content. Content will be in a readable text file format. But if you are writing using put w, the content will not be readable. Still the data is there. If you read it using get w, you will get back that data. So for I is equal to 0, I less than n numbers we are taking from the user and writing into the file represented by f1, and we are closing it. Okay, now after closing it, our input file is ready with the contents. Okay, then we are going to read data from that file, the file we just created. So what we do is we do fopen in read mode, fopen in read mode, Then we need two output files, odd and even. Odd file will store odd numbers from among the numbers taken from this file, and even numbers will be written into even file. Okay, so we open all the three files, input file and the output files. F2 and F3 represent the output file. Now here we are writing certain numbers, but we are not considering how many numbers are there. Without looking into n, what we are doing is we are going to read until end of the file. So while not FEOF, if FEOF function is checking for end of the file, EOF means end of the file, while not end of the file, F1, F1 is our input file from which we are reading. So as long as there are numbers in that file or data in the file, this loop will execute. Now in the loop, what we are doing, we read a number, one number at a time, using getW, and store in this variable. And if that variable is even, how we are checking even numbers? Using mode 2. Mode 2 for even numbers will give result 0. So if that number is even, we write it into F3. F3 is our even file. F3 pointer F3 represents the file that contains even numbers. So we write it into F3. Otherwise we write it into F2. F2 represents the odd file where we have to store the odd numbers. So we are using a simple if else statement. Even number, if part is for even number, we write it in the even file. Else part is for odd numbers, we write it into the odd file. After that we are closing all the three files. Okay, now what we do is we read from the odd file and even file and display it back. Display the read from odd and even files, display all the numbers. So while we are reading from the odd file first, odd file is represented by F2 pointer, while not end of the file F2, we get the number, and we one more time we are checking this read operation whether it is resulting in a end of the file. One more time we are checking so if already the end of the file is reached, this read operation will give us end of the file value, that is -1. So if it is not -1, we are printing it back. So we read a number, if it is not the end of the file or -1, we are writing into the display device. This is reading from the odd file, then we are reading from the even file, while FEOF not end of the file F3, read and write into the display device. Finally we are closing it. So this is a bit large program, but not very complex. The logic is simple. Reading from the user, writing into a file, then reading from that file and dividing the content into two different files, then reading from those two different files and writing onto the display. Okay, logic is not so complex, just to be familiar with like little bit complex programs. Okay, we cannot always live with very simple programs alone. We need to initially, when we are not familiar with C programming or any programming language, we are dealing with very simple programs, hello world programs, adding two numbers, etc. Now we have come along a long way. We have reached the end of the course, and you should be able to understand and even write sufficiently complex programs, or at least do not fear while seeing a complex program. So when we are executing this program, it is asking how many numbers. Maybe I will input 8 numbers. 8 numbers are inputted, 1 to 8, or any numbers I can input. Now contents of the odd file 1357, odd numbers. Contents of the even file 2468. If you go to the drive, disk, hard disk, secondary storage or hard disk, the particular folder, we can see 3 files created, just now created at 1010, 10 10 10 10. So if you open, since they are binary files, it will not make much sense for us. Binary files, actually they are these are the data here is 1 to 8, numbers 1 to 8. Okay, this contains even numbers and this contains odd numbers. That's it.